Welcome to Curito Connects. I'm your host, Jenn, and I've been conversing with friends around the world about life challenges and impactful moments. Conversations on this platform look at answering the questions, how we overcome challenges and how our experiences shape who we are and the work we do today. I hope this work can inspire you on your own personal and individual journey. Let's dive right in.
Hello, my guest today is Singapore-based Diana Ng, founder of the Elemental Practice, where she offers somatic therapy and coaching. What she offers is a synthesis of her personal exploration as a kinesthetic, deeply thinking, feeling, and highly sensitive individual. Hi, Diana, and welcome to Curito Connects. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with somatic work, you may have heard me talk about it with other somatic practitioners in previous episodes, but it is a very broad subject encompassing many different approaches. And I'd encourage you to Google it and learn more if you are curious. And Diana can tell us more about it too. But before we dive into the topic, I'm excited to have Diana share with us another topic dear to her heart, which is shifting out of the good girl archetype that is strongly encouraged both by society and culturally, and how she was able to shift out of that to find her voice, expression, and authentic self. Diana strongly believes that so much of our ideas and values are held at the level of the body, which is why she offers the somatic work she does. As they say, the body houses a soul, so doesn't that correlate? Without further ado, Diana, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our audience and talk about what the good girl archetype means and how you broke free of that.
Hi, Jen. I'm really glad to be here with you. And, this topic is really close to my heart. Right now, the work I offer spans the gamut of somatic coaching, therapy, tension and trauma release exercise, qigong, a bunch of different modalities. And I see this so much with my clients. And when we got the chance to think about what we might speak about together, to me, being able to discuss this with somebody who also has an Asian lineage, it feels really special, because I think there's so much tied up with this idea of being good, 乖女孩, like be a good girl, and 乖女孩不要哭, like good girls don't cry. Like there are all of these things that we get told to us from such a young age that we take in, and I think I'm no different. Like for me, when I was a little girl, I was very sensitive, very weepy, very shy. And I think I quickly learned that my tears or my intensity of emotion made my family a bit uncomfortable. They didn't know what to do with me. And there would often be this refrain of like, oh, hush, it's okay. Girls don't cry. Don't express yourself this way. Other people are looking. So there was such a notion of shame, I think, that began to be tied in to emotion. And I also quickly learned that what seemed to make my parents really happy was for me to do well in school and be quietly playing in the corner. And I feel that sort of began to shape the life, the choices that I made for a lot of my life. And Singapore, where I've grown up, very much encourages these set trajectories. You move from one school to the next, and if you go to this school, it must mean you're going to go to that next school, and the path just continues. And I think when from a young age we learn how to not listen, or we learn that what our body wants to do isn't always welcomed, it's almost easier to go along with this pathway that everyone seems to think is the right pathway. And I trotted along that pathway. Like I was prefect in every school I went to, student counselor, one of the top students, government scholar, went to Oxford, went to Harvard, got into a kind of elite scheme of service in the government, really walking that track and ticking all the right boxes.
So outstanding, Diana. You have such a pretty resume there.
Well, I think I can look back on it and just sort of almost feel like it's a little bit laughable because it's basically the Asian parent's dream, right? Like this is the ideal pathway that someone would have walked. And I think for me, it came to a point where I was getting a little bit more senior in my work, and I realized that I just wasn't feeling satisfied. And I think for me, from a young age, I always wanted to be of service. I always wanted to be of direct help to people. And for a while, when I was working in the government, at least in Singapore, that's a really great way, actually, to be able to make a difference. But the more senior I got, the more distanced I became from the people who I was helping. And everything began to feel very hollow. And when I made the decision to leave, it was like, I wish I could tell you, it's like such a graceful, mindful decision, that I was like, yes, I'm so clear, I'm going to gracefully exit. It was not like that at all. There was so much struggle that emerged from within myself. All of these good girl narratives came up with that when I felt like I wanted to leave and explore things that I've been exploring for many years in my own personal time, which was related to the body, to movement, to spirituality. And I think the only reason how I arrived at my decision was through a lot of therapy in that year of making my decision.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you, when we talk about, this good girl, good boy archetype, and, again, we said it's not only within Asian culture, it's, cultures around the world. However, one very unique element to Asian culture is the notion of, the Confucian teaching of filial piety, right? 孝顺 in Chinese.
Mm.
So I thought maybe to ask you how you would thread this value system into, in a way, sometimes I think some of us will say, it's because of that there's this added pressure or this added like weight for being the good girl, good boy archetype. So if you want to throw in your 2 cents on this one to kind of, for our audience to hear a little bit more about that and your own experience as well.
Mm. Yes. Yes, I can't say yes enough, I feel like this notion of filial piety that is expected within family structures, whether nuclear family, extended family, it creates a lot of pressure around speaking up about what might not be what we want. Anything that goes against what an elder might have asked for or requested, it's seen as deviant behavior. And I think it then makes it even more challenging because the act of choosing differently from what others expect you to, what your elders expect you to, is seen as you being like a disappointment within the family. I think there are many layers to this because of that added pressure of filial piety. And even when I look to some of the clients I support right now, it is hard for them to acknowledge that the good girl archetype might have been reinforced by their parents because it's seen as wrong to question their parents or to even be curious about whether what their parents or their elders might have said was right for them was maybe wrong. There's a real hesitance there, I feel, that is very influenced by this notion of needing to be 孝顺 or filial.
So can I backtrack you a little bit?
Yeah.
So the good girl archetype that we just illustrated earlier, which yes, I can totally relate to. However, I was definitely not a great student, and I was the rebellious one in my family, so I did not follow that beautiful CV trajectory. So I have my own sets of issues there, but I wanted to ask, so while, when growing up and following the good girl archetype, which I'm sure many people listening can relate to, especially if you grew up in an Asian household. Actually, in some cultures too, it's not necessarily only Asians. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, the studying, what kind of activities you did, what instrument you played, et cetera, what schools you went to, which, you went to the best of the best, and both in Europe and in the US,
Mhm.
and then coming back to find yourself in a job that, to what you said earlier, did allow you to do kind of the work you wanted to do, be of service. So you found a
Mm.
role within the government to allow you to do that. And then, so out of curiosity, while you were living this archetype life,
Mhm.
I don't know if boyfriend and marriage and kids through, ended up in that picture as well. But how
Mm.
did you then seek out the, like you said earlier, all this spiritual healing stuff on the side? Like, was that out
Mhm.
of curiosity for your own needs at the time? Or, how were you exposed to your first yoga class? Or how did you stumble across all these different types of modalities to kind of allow you to figure out? It sounded like you were saying earlier that you felt hollow, but also I guess you were seeking for something, right? And so
Mhm.
obviously then therapy came in as well, which we can talk about some more too, because again, in Asian cultures, you don't really seek a therapist.
Mhm.
So I thought I would throw those kind of questions out there for you to kind of bring us a fuller picture.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, so I identify as being a highly sensitive person, and from a really young age, like just spirituality was something that seemed to be important to think about. Just like what does the bigger world mean? And so I first came across yoga by myself in the bookstore. I just bought a book when I was 13, and then I just taught myself from that book. And at the time, it really wasn't very much of a thing here. But over time, I think I just continued to nurture that. I mean, it started through yoga, and then I explored different kinds of meditation and different kinds of energy healing, both receiving and then learning and training. So that was always going in parallel alongside my more typical good girl pathway. And I feel fortunate that for whatever reason there was this seed that was planted so early on that I think helped me to see more clearly the hollowness of what it was that I felt like I needed to be versus how I felt when I was authentically enjoying and pursuing things that really mattered to me. So I think I had that contrast because that seed had been planted so early on. And I think that was what was probably a really helpful reference point, rather than how it might work for some people where it comes to a point where there is that awareness of the hollowness, but there actually isn't anything else to recognize as what feels true or what feels nourishing and what feels aligned to what matters to them. Yeah.
I think that's why a lot of times when people get to that point, then they direct themselves to other distractions like
Yeah.
alcohol or uh, other things. So you were saying it took you about a year or so before you decided to quit.
Hmm.
Lots of therapy work. What did you discover during your therapy sessions that then gave you the confidence to be like, all right, I'm going to make this decision. My family's not going to be happy about this. I'm breaking the good girl archetype here.
Yeah.
I'm setting myself free.
It was when I think back to that time, it's quite funny because the therapist's office was a short walk from my office from where I was working, and in the office there'd be a certain construct, right? So being the good girl also applied in the office of how I present and how I speak, and using all of those appropriate words or ways of presenting myself. And then just a short walk down from that would be my therapist's office. And in that space, I think I just came to really become aware of the tension, like the amount of tension between what on an instinctive level for me felt true. Like I was like at an instinctive level, I could not deny the sense that I actually need to leave. And the shoulds, the loudness of all the shoulds, like, oh, but I should stay. It's a stable job. And I should do this because I get opportunities my parents didn't have. But I should do this because all my peers who went to these schools are have all these kinds of good jobs, right? See, even my language. So I came to really hear that tension more clearly. And maybe because up to that point, I hadn't really spoken about these tensions. It's a bit hard to within family because the pressures exist there, and then amongst peers, I guess it would really have depended. But so many of my peers were also in that mode of being good, whether a good girl or a good boy, and I think that was the first time not only that I thought or saw the tension, but I felt that somatically within my body too, like feeling a sense of how clearly something was amiss in my continuing working in this role, and at the same time how much contraction, how much fear there was about choosing differently. I think that was really what therapy offered me at the time. And in the end, when I made my decision, it it again was just this like, I can't do it anymore. I'm just going to jump. It was that kind of feeling. And even after it took a while, I feel like walking off the path that's been really well laid, and well lit by other friends, by family, by the institutions, by society. Taking the other path feels very uncomfortable. And uncomfortable also because I feel like when somebody walks a different path, it actually plants a seed of not necessarily doubt, but it plants a seed of curiosity in other people for whom that tension probably exists as well. And it makes them uncomfortable to think, oh, why did you do this? Why did you walk away from this stable job with a pension that you were earning so well in to not do anything, which I didn't for a while before I started to teach yoga classes and offer body work. But I think that also made things uncomfortable for people who had known me or my peers who had gone through that similar pathway of being the good girl or the good boy. Yeah.
So, would you say that during that period, there was like a shift in terms of the friends you were hanging out with, like
Mm.
how your dynamic with your family was? How were you able to? I don't know if coping is the right word here, but I
Mhm.
think you understand what I'm getting at in terms of how did you deal with those emotions, and again, the fact that you made this choice and you are responsible for the choice you made to have
Mm.
left that very good girl archetype job to explore. So you said you took a few years off to explore, and I guess really go inwards, right? To be like, well, who is Diana, and what does Diana
Mm.
want, right? What
Yes,
does Diana want to share in this world and offer? So, how did you kind of go about that period until you found what you decided on, which is the elemental practice here? And can you like talk
mm.
about that process, like how you know, in that few years of turmoil? Again, like you said, in hindsight, when you look back at it, it was a beautiful journey, but not when you were in it.
Yeah, for sure. My short answer to you is awkwardly. Awkwardly, that's how I managed. And I guess I want to name that because I feel sometimes we get so hard on ourselves in the way we manage transitions. But the reality is, what seemed maybe to other people, like a shift in a job, to me was a shift in identity and also a shift in responsibility. I mean, I love that you mentioned that, right? Like, as I'm making this choice, I'm making this choice from the place of my agency and my autonomy. And I feel like that is also what makes it hard for many people to shift out of being a good girl. There's something very comforting about going, okay, I'm following along, and this is what everybody approves of. It's sanctioned, it's allowed. And when it is that you make a choice like this, there is this clear sense that I have to deal with everything that comes from it, whether that is financial or emotional or whatever else might come in that territory. And I think for me, what that looked like in the coping was continuing to spend a lot of time inwards, listening, spending a lot of time in nature, which inspires a lot of my work. There's something about nature in all of its different expressions that is valid. You don't look at a flower and go, "Gosh, why are your petals red? Why can't they be yellow?" They just are. So I think spending a lot of time in nature, being with a lot of self inquiry, and I think allowing space for all these different emotions of fear and confusion and anger, or allowing the sense of being misunderstood, allowing space for all of that. And I don't feel like it was a point that I was suddenly free from this archetype. I would say even till today, it's so firmly baked into my system that there are always the little pockets that I discover, and I get surprised. I was like, oh, there you are. Okay, another remnant of this good girl archetype. And I feel like as I continued to stay on this course, right? To stay on this course that I'd chosen to have left, to be exploring body work as something I was offering as a service. The more I continued in that and showing up in quite a vulnerable way, to put forward into the world something that really mattered to me. Again, not something that someone told me was my title, not a piece of work that someone has dictated that I do, but something that I am choosing to offer. And letting over time that process give me confidence in what it was that mattered to me, and the validity of that. But my parents certainly did not respond well to my choice. They were horrified, really horrified. And it took us a while. It took us some space also before they were able to welcome my choice a little bit more. And part of shifting out of that good girl archetype was beyond changing the place of my work. It also catalyzed lots of other shifts, right? Setting much clearer express boundaries with my parents around what was okay and not okay for me to be participating in, whether it's conversations, whether it's obligations, triangulations of dynamics. I also moved out of the house because I felt like it was important in order to get clearer about who I was and what mattered to me. It would be hard to figure that out within the power dynamics of living under my parents' roof, and to be able to have space to grow when I continued to be held within such fixed notions of who Diana was supposed to be. Yeah.
I know we're not recording this on video, but I'm nodding my head every few sentences that you're saying. I'm like, yeah, agree, understand, totally, 100%. um, so I think I kind of brushed upon this earlier, but how did you eventually figure out that somatic was what you wanted to do? as the choice for you. Could you share with us a little bit like your own experience, and I know it's all very intertwined into the last 20 some minutes that we've been chatting already
Mm.
about your growth and your awakening, whatever terminology people like to use to call upon just kind of like finding your true essence, so to speak.
Mhm.
So through your own experience with somatic movement, how did that help you with clarity? And how then did you decide, like, well, this is amazing, I want to be able to offer this to more
Mm.
people?
Mm.
And then if I could just throw in there kind of how did you slowly allow your parents and those around you, and those who are close to you, like, kind of quote unquote get what you're doing, kind of like what you said earlier.
Mm.
It's like, well, it took them a while. Like, I quit my job, I left the good girl archetype, and here I was just exploring all these different things. I moved out, I did all these things that they were kind of like, what is she doing? Such a well-educated girl, like da 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 da. Like, why is she suddenly going all hippie now?
Yeah.
Or however, we want to coin it. But how is it that they slowly started to see and understand that? So
Mm.
I think they're kind of intertwined as questions. So I thought
Mhm.
maybe you could illustrate a little bit more for us here.
Yeah, maybe I'll speak to that one first. You sound like you know the Asian parent language. Uh, I don't think my parents were surprised by this like supposed hippie choice. I've always been kind of hippie all this while, but they tolerated it because I and for the most part was choosing the correct pathway. I To be honest, I want to kind of credit my parents for slowly but surely coming around to being more open. I wouldn't say that even till today, like having done this for quite a few years, that they fully accept it. I think my dad, up till recently, would be asking or making comments around when are you going to go back to work, like saying things like that, even though I'm clearly working and I'm having client sessions and all of that. But for him, it wasn't a real job. And so I think there's still a little bit of that. But I think what helped, strangely enough, was COVID, like the whole period where we couldn't really go anywhere. And my parents being a little bit older, I landed up going back home and I would offer them sessions, um, gentle touch sessions, and they would feel better for it. I feel that was probably what swung things the most for my dad, and then also for my mom, them having the direct experience of maybe feeling much more ease, maybe feeling much more energy, being able to sleep better after having a touch session. That probably was the biggest thing for them, like realizing this isn't some concept, there's actually something that she does and maybe it's a benefit. I think just planting the seed of possibility, and that for me, that they hold the possibility that maybe this work is of value, is already a big step from where we first began when I decided to leave. And then to the second question of why somatic work. So I think for me, as a highly sensitive person, I don't know how much or how familiar you are with this terminology of highly sensitive people that was coined by Dr. Elaine Aron. And what I find really fascinating about that is the recognition that HSPs have brains that are wired differently, brains that think very deeply, sometimes too deeply, very analytically about everything. And I think what that means is it can be really challenging for me personally to engage in talk therapy, because I know where someone's coming at me with a question, like what they're hoping to hear, what they're wanting to find out. And something in me can give the right answer. I can perform in that moment to give the right answer. And after some time, it would maybe feel a little bit like a game. And in contrast, whenever I've received more somatic based work, whether that is like Feldenkrais, whether that is in the form of somatic therapy, I have found that I've been able to touch into places that I'm surprised by. And this is what's known as bottom up healing. And I've really come to recognize different memories, different emotions that were held so deeply that I didn't even have very active conscious awareness of. And for me, that has been where I've had the biggest shift and transformation in my own journey. And that leaves me with a deep seated and embodied belief that that can be a very powerful place of change for many other people. Yeah.
So I just want you to explain to our listeners who may not have heard the terminology highly sensitive individual. Could
Mhm.
you educate us a little bit about what a highly sensitive individual entails or means?
Yeah. So so when so firstly, I highly recommend you read the book because it's very comprehensive. And
What's the
when
title of the book?
I think it's
What's the
just called The
title?
Highly Sensitive
Okay,
Person.
okay. I'll put
And
it in the episode resource link below.
yeah, great. Because when I first read the book, it just set off so many ahas for me. And it's a book that I recommend to so many of my clients because many people who come to explore this work with me are themselves highly sensitive, whether or not they realized it before or not. And the key thing to recognize is that highly sensitive people's brains are wired differently. So it's not about someone being, what's the term that they use, like a strawberry or a snowflake. It's not about somebody trying to be a certain way because they are weak-willed, because they want attention, but it's really a recognition that people are wired differently, and that presents in the form of deep thinking about everything. Yeah, that's one of the things I just spoke about. Another way it expresses is being very aware of the subtleties. So that could mean that somebody walks into a room and somebody who's highly sensitive will be able to notice the incongruence that exists between what the person's saying and how that person feels. And it might be something that somebody else won't be able to pick up on. So it becomes very hard to sometimes explain to a peer, like, yeah, I something's off, and I don't know what it is. They're friendly, but something's off. And so I think we all have this ability, but for highly sensitive people, it's very much amplified. The other thing is that their nervous system or our nervous system is particularly responsive. And I like to use that instead of reactive. And what that means is both in terms of challenging stimulus as well as positive stimulus, the response is much greater. So to somebody who's highly sensitive, if they were to encounter a place of beauty and awe, the level of awe is just through the roof. They're moved to tears. They can lie there for hours and appreciate the sky or the tree or the sunset, weeping the whole time, maybe. And at the same time, it also means when there's challenging stimulus, how their nervous system responds can be also very, very quick, where there's very high levels of activation from smaller triggers. And there's also an ability for highly sensitive people to have a keen sense of observation. Yeah, so just kind of noticing lots of different details in a space. And so that also means that they might feel much more affected by their environment, much more affected by the company that they're around because they're noticing all of these details. Yeah, so
Mm.
those are the characteristics that make up someone who's highly sensitive. And I think on a practical level, what that often means, because till today, I feel it's still, at least in Asia, very much undiscussed as an example of a type that sits along that spectrum of neurodivergence. It's not really mentioned, and
Oh.
I think what that can look like for someone is they spent their whole lives feeling like they're too much, like they're ashamed of feeling the way they do. They've spent a lot of time repressing emotions because it feels like people can't handle it around them. And often that repression of all of that emotion can wind up showing up somatically, showing up in terms of inflammation within the body, showing up in the form of depression or anxiety. So I feel that practical aspect of what happens when somebody's innate sensitivity isn't embraced can really lead to real issues. And linking back to the good girl archetype, what that also means is if somebody is highly sensitive and their nervous system is more responsive, if from a young age that is seen as a child trying to get out of doing something because they're not trying hard enough, then a highly sensitive child can grow up constantly learning how to override what their threshold actually is. Constantly. Like, I need to do more. I'm exhausted, but I must do more. And it can also look like I have these needs, but my needs are not okay. The needs that other people express are the needs that I need to follow. So that can look like fawning, lots of fawning behavior, people pleasing behavior. It can look like overachieving that at some point leads to burnout. So those are some aspects of how the highly sensitive person also links very closely with the good girl archetype that we were speaking about before.
What a great summary. I think you really shine light onto the work in somatic movement and what highly sensitive people, I guess, like that definition that we were talking about, right? And I think
Mhm.
it's so important to bring about across this awareness and educate people more and more, especially these days when so many people even into their adulthood life are getting tests to see if they're what's like their ADD or ADHD. Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of this health and mental health talk, right, that's been happening, and a lot of people are trying to understand themselves better. But like you said earlier, there is so much levels and work that needs to be done in order for you to really, really get deep, deep, deep down into the core of it all, right? Like, how long would you have said it took you from when you decided to quit corporate to starting
Mm.
your own company? And
Oh.
it's never ending. It's
Mm.
still ongoing, like you mentioned
Mhm.
before too, right? But just so we can kind of have like a little time frame of space and understanding.
Yeah, it actually wasn't that long. I feel like a lot. So I think from the time that I left to the time I started, it was just 6 months.
Oh, that's
But
quite short.
yeah, but along the way, I think so. From the time that I started, I continued to be in this unpacking and deconditioning of the good girl archetype. Yeah,
Yeah,
so that was sort of ongoing as I continued to walk this path, this new path that was a little bit different, a
yeah.
little bit more uncharted. Yeah.
It's very brave of you to start so quickly, to
I
like
don't
go
know.
from one thing and then
Foolhardy. But
like just like throw yourself in there. I feel like I definitely took much longer, years, to really be where we are talking about today. Like, I'm comfortable with this. Like, I don't want to do the corporate anymore. This is the path I want to be
mm,
on. And even
mm,
right now, speaking to you in this episode, it's like I'm still searching for that clarity of like, well, what am I offering, right? But that's why I love these conversations. So I wanted to ask, uh, now that we've kind of covered the good girl archetype, how you broke away from it,
mhm.
what kind of 2 cent or words of wisdom would you give to your younger self what you know now, or that you would encourage other people? I mean, even your clients who come to see you,
Mm,
you know, what kind of advice would you give them now that you know, like you kind of, you know, you've done the good girl archetype and you've walked down
mm,
the path and you've really worked through, you know, your highly sensitive self to figure
mm,
out like, well, this is the version of Diana that I want to live in the world. And these are
mhm,
the things that I like and that I want to offer, and this and that.
mhm. It's actually really simple. I feel like if I could go back in time and speak to my younger self, it would be to just let her know you're okay as you are. Like really that you're okay as you are. And I feel that same idea is what underpins a lot of the client sessions that I have. Right. And so often people might come in and they just start crying because there's a sense that their emotions are okay to be in the shared space between us.
Mm,
Or when they're lying on the massage table, receiving support that is safe, support that is attuned, support that's gentle, without them needing to do anything. Again, there's this sense of, oh, I'm okay. Like I'm able and worthy and of enough value to receive support without me needing to effort for it, without me needing to be anything else other than how I am right now. It shows up also in one of the exercises I often do with clients when they first arrive, which is in terms of exploring boundaries and consent, and just having people feel like my needs, however specific and particular that they might be, move a little to the right. Oh, I like your hand there. Oh, I would like something here. The more it is that somebody can feel allowed in their expression without there being a corresponding reaction, rejection, irritation, again, there is that sense, yeah, I'm okay as I am. I have all of these specific needs, which might actually, from another perspective, be such precise understanding and awareness of what their body needs. Yeah. But yeah, I'm okay to have all of these specific needs and I can still be met and I can still be welcomed and not pushed away. So there is a real building of relational safety that might not have been possible, might not
mm,
have been available when someone was young. And I know for sure I would have wanted to offer that to myself too when I was
yeah.
younger.
Wow, that's so nice. So what, now that you've like illustrated all of this, and I like to always ask this question towards closer towards the end of our conversation, which
Mm.
we're coming close in time. But like, what keeps you grounded nowadays? You know, has that grounding effort or practice changed over the course of your exploration? You know, like when you said earlier,
Mm.
when you were younger and you were kind of, you know, doing what was expected of you, but you were also exploring this side of life, so to speak, you know, meditation, yoga,
Mm.
and somatics. Has that core changed for you over the years? Like what keeps
Mm.
you grounded today?
Yeah. Oh, I love that invitation. I feel the constant for me has been nature. That has always been my go to, and it remains. When I get myself out in nature, I don't need to be doing very much. I just take a mat and I lie down. And after some time, everything just resettles. It's like water finding its level. So nature remains my constant. But I think in terms of the practices that supported me, they've changed. Um, I would say there was a period of time the practices I that really supported me were much more active. So for quite a while, I practiced quite a lot of active meditation, using movement and sound as a way to find stillness. Now I would say qigong is one of the practices that I really appreciate, because I love that in qigong your eyes are open. I love that it's a standing practice. I love that it reminds me to remain upright in the world and open to the world while still feeling grounded and supported. So that probably is my practice now, more
Mm.
than some of the more dynamic practices I was engaging in before when I was younger.
I love how you brought that up because it's so true. One, like, we all go through different chapters in our life. Yeah. So I think
Mm.
in the different chapters, you're constantly in different stages, different phases, doing different things, right? And so I like how you described how your groundingness practice has evolved and changed over time, right?
Mm.
And I definitely personally can resonate to that as well. I definitely did a lot of endurance sports in my younger days, and have kind of, the practice has now been less active and more energetic, so to speak, right? So in terms of more
Mm.
like, yeah, there's a qigong practice or meditation practice or breath work
Mm.
practice, but that takes time, and I think it's not something where everyone has their entry point to it, and it varies for everybody. Okay, so we're coming short on time, and I will ask you my last question, which I normally ask my guest, which is what resources would you recommend to those who are listening to this episode, that have helped you along the way? Or, it could be anything from, yeah, a book or mentors or, any kind of resources that really helped you, or if it, I think for someone who might be interested in somatics, like somatic movement, how
Mm.
could they get started? What would you recommend? So if you, and I'm sure you have a lot in your library of index, but if
Mhm.
you could list out a few highlights that you really, to your dear heart, it's always something you tell people. And I know earlier you had mentioned the highly sensitive people, so I have that down.
Mhm.
If you could just share with
Mhm.
us a few more, that I'd be happy to put in the episode resources link below.
Yeah. So I guess when I hear you ask that question, what comes to me, and I guess it's not quite a resource in the same way as a book link, but the two practices that maybe people could just try for themselves. Right? Like one of them is very much inspired by nature, relates to what I was sharing before. This idea of going out into nature and having a sit somewhere. The less curated and the more wild the nature landscape is, the better. And just noticing the diversity, just really sitting there with soft eyes and noticing the diversity of nature, how unique each plant is, how unique each tree grows, even of the same species, and finding beauty over time in that wild, diverse landscape. I feel like the more it is that we're able to notice that in the nature that surrounds us, the easier it is to appreciate the uniqueness of ourselves. So that's a practice anybody can do with zero cost. And I think the other practice that I often invite my clients to try is to offer a kind hand to themselves. And it sounds like a very strange phrasing. Sometimes people go, "What do you mean a kind hand?" And it's really putting a hand somewhere on the body. Could be at the center of the chest, could be at the belly, maybe both. And letting that hand soften in the way that maybe a parent might meet their sleeping child, or you might meet their favorite pet, or it could be the way in which you might meet a flower, right? In a way that you don't want to disturb, but you're there. And and letting that be a way to meet oneself when there's joy, but when there's sadness, when there's aloneness. And I feel that in that support that we can offer ourselves in those moments of challenge, the more it is that we give ourselves permission with whatever is showing up. And I feel, to go back to that good girl notion, it continues to support us being as we are. even if it might not follow so firmly that notion of what a good girl might look like. Yeah.
Mm, I love those two recommendations. This is
Mm.
one of the few individuals on Curito Connects that have not listed a book or podcast, and very practical suggestions. I love it. Thank you so much.
Mm.
Well, did you have anything else you wanted to add to our conversation before we wrap up and say bye?
Yeah, I just enjoyed speaking about all of this with you. Thank you for
Oh,
having me on.
thank you for sharing. And I, again, will put your information below so people who are in Singapore or who are interested, because you do some online work as well, right?
Hmm.
So people who are interested or curious could definitely reach out to you, and let's see what happens. I don't know, maybe we can do something together as well.
Yeah, I love
So
that.
thank you again, and wishing all the best.
Thank you, Jen.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening to Curito Connects. For more Connects content, collaborations, and discoveries set to inspire you on your own individual journey, please head to our website at www.curito.co. Until next time, stay inspired, and thank you for joining us at Curito Connects.